Well, good afternoon. It's Gary Sly and the Legacy of Handmade Objects. It's Monday, the last day of March of 2025. As always, on my days off, I've been out running around doing errands, looking into some opportunities here in downtown as I think about expanding my business. Hope everything is well where you are. I thought today I would share a wonderful old book that I found here in the shop. It's an old cross-stitch pattern book from 1931. And as a part of that discussion, I wanted to just say again a little bit of something I talked about a few weeks ago about reusing things. I know that having just been at market with 130 designers there and all the kind of wonderful ideas that come along to us, that we're often impelled to go for the most popular or the most current designs and ideas. But I was at a business meeting at market this year, and most of the shop owners and designers were there, or many of the shop owners anyway. And there was a discussion about selling vintage patterns. Now, if any of you have ever been to my place, you know that at one point I had as many as 12,000 vintage patterns. Since I've moved into the new place and kind of moved things around a bit, I have been sorting through those and getting rid of some that are duplicates or that might be damaged in some way. But I still think when all is said and done, I'll have 5,000 or 6,000 vintage patterns from way back. The book I'm going to look at with you in a minute here today is from 1931, and most of what I have starts in the late 1970s and up from there. Anyhow, I was in this business meeting, and there was some discussion about various things that shop owners are doing to try to stay viable and stay open and all that. And one man stood up, and he was talking about a shop that he runs with his wife, and his opinion on vintage patterns was pretty much you should dump them. He thought it was kind of funny. I don't think that I did, but he replied that if you're running a shop, you have the newest and best patterns. If you're running a museum, you take the old stuff and put it out. Well, I guess maybe I'm running a little bit of a museum here along with the current work that comes my way, because I feel like an important part of our heritage, an important part of our history as stitchers, is this long lineage of designs. Now, as far as I know, cross-stitch in this country really got its kind of revival in the 1980s and the 1990s. And of course, when I started stitching in the early 80s, there weren't as many ideas out there, and there weren't as many things that somebody like me, a male who lived in the mountains of Virginia, would be all that interested in stitching. But I still think it would be a shame to just dump all that out. I think about one designer in particular that I knew personally. Many of you will remember Gloria and Pat and some of the designs that they used to put out. They were quite successful and quite common in stitching shops and in the stitching world earlier in the 20th century, before the turn of the century. Well, I knew Pat briefly. She lived near me here in Florida before she passed away. And I often will come across some of her precious moment designs that she and Gloria did. While they're not my taste at all, and while they may not be an important part of just about anybody's stitching style today, it would be a shame if none of them existed. It would be a shame if those patterns and the ideas and the emotions that they reflected were completely erased. Not to mention the legacy of those designers who were busy during those times, who were entrepreneurs, mostly women, in a time when maybe not too many women were doing that kind of thing. Elsa Williams is a name that some of you older stitchers may remember. She was quite well known in needlepoint and in yarns, and you'll still see her name sometime when you see old patterns. Elsa Williams was a successful businesswoman, a woman that comes to my shop quite frequently, worked for her up in New England a long time ago, probably 40 years ago. And she talked about kind of what a hard driver she was and what a successful businesswoman that she was. So I guess I have to disagree with my friend who says that if you don't dump all the old vintage stuff, then you're just running a museum. I do think there are times when we want to reach back and not only look at these books, but maybe use these patterns. We may adapt them, we may use different colors. There's all sorts of things that we can do with them, but I think it would be a shame to lose them altogether. So that's my little soapbox lesson for today. But I was digging through, I was actually sorting, as I said I've been doing, and I was digging through a bin that I call Stitcher's Choice. And for me, it's all kinds of interesting things like hardanger and Swedish weave and I don't know, any number of lesser known kind of styles of stitching that I wish I could get around to. And so I put them all in one bin called Stitcher's Choice. And in the back of that, I found this book called Cross Stitch Embroidery. It's written by Ray Uffland and Lily Ziporkes. I wasn't able to find too much out about those two. I did see that they lived in New York City and they had addresses in New York City. The book was published in 1931 by Whitman Publishing out of Racine, Wisconsin. You can tell a lot about what's going on during a period when you look at books and when you really kind of explore them a little bit. And of course, I'm a great bibliophile. I love books. I took a course one time on Edgar Allan Poe at the American Studies program at the College of William and Mary. And we learned a lot then about printing processes and what you can learn about books just by observing them very carefully. One of the first things I noticed is this has holes in it for a 3-ring binder. So it would have been intended to be a collection that somebody would have taken and probably reused over and over again. It is actually a booklet. It has, I don't think the pages are numbered, so I can't tell you how many pages, probably 32 pages. It's made of a fairly heavy cardstock, and it is printed in color, which in 1931 was a little bit more complex than it is today. Now, I won't say that these are complex patterns. For the most part, they're very simple kind of geometric line drawings and things like that. And of course, the color choices that they used in 1931 were going to be quite different than what we would use today. They gave you a suggestion for color combinations of orange and black, green and yellow, tan and brown, light and dark rose. And of course, there's nothing wrong with those combinations, but they don't strike one as being terribly modern today. I just read a quick line or two from the introduction. Cross-stitch embroidery was done by our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, and most of our ancestors down through the ages. Today we find it just as fascinating. And then they go ahead and give you some basic design elements. And honestly, as I see people working on things today, these are still some pieces that folks might enjoy having as part of what they're doing when they're putting things together. They give you simple borders and corners. They give you more elaborate borders. And this is where you can innovate. This is where you can pick out some of your favorite colors or use some of those hand-dyed variegated threads or any number of things. If you're embellishing a towel or a pillowcase, or you want to put a little special something on something that you're working on, this is a great little resource. I often, when I do Christmas stockings, will personalize them. And so you can pick up some ideas from a book like this. Not to mention, I suspect if we really look into these designs, they have a rich history of their own. I mean, doesn't that look a little bit like the hex signs in the Pennsylvania Dutch area? So you might be able to see some of the ethnic influences on the United States pre-World War II when you take a look at this. I thought it was interesting that they gave us some ideas of what you might stitch on. There are things that would have been very useful at the time. Baby towels. Some of these may not be things that we use a lot today, but at that point they were quite helpful. Child's bibs and a tray cover. Look at that wonderful little illustration there. And of course they give you some suggestions of reindeer and ducks and bunnies and things like that. A little child's dress that you might do some smocking on, or you might do some cross stitch of. A work bag with a drawstring. Nice idea even today if you're looking for some things to put together as a little gift for someone. Designs for a baby pillow. Not sure if we use pillows with babies too much anymore, but they certainly would have at that time. And here's something I'm pretty sure you don't use anymore, is a breakfast set. A tray with stitched designs in the tray, and then matching napkins and all kinds of fun things like that. So that's a little picture in time. Same thing with a luncheon set. Do you set your table several times a day with different patterns and different ideas? Maybe not a lot of people did in 1931, but that was considered the ideal. A bridge set. If you play bridge and you want matching pieces, they even give you ideas about how to embellish that using the suits of cards. Guest towels, just a variety of things like that. This is a snapshot in time, a studio set. Gives a very cosmopolitan New York view to cross stitching at the time. So you can see that the point of this was to contemporize cross stitch and make it something that a person of that day would pick up and find to be stylish and helpful. One thing that I did think was quite interesting and tells you a lot about what was happening then as opposed to now is how they talk about canvas. There's no mention anywhere in this book of the word Aida, A-I-D-A, which is of course the most common fabric that most people do cross stitch on today. They talk about mostly using a waste canvas or some kind of other material and cross stitching on everyday designs like dresses, shirts, and all the rest of that. They did give a couple of examples of cloth that you could use if you wanted to cross stitch directly. They mentioned canvas cloth, which I guess could include Aida, but they don't mention it specifically. Moravian linen, homespun, monk's cloth, burlap, scrim, gingham, and even theatrical gauze. I don't even know what some of those are. Most of those are words that I recognize. But as you can see, the idea of cross-stitching at this point was very much a part of daily life and materials that somebody would have had. So I'm not sure if you would have had any opportunity to go to a stitching shop or something like that. You would have just gone to your local sewing store and found the materials there that would be best suited for whatever it is you were wanting to cross stitch. Now the history of cross stitch does indeed go very far back, but I think if you take a leap from this to the 1980s and beyond, where you see where we are in terms of cross stitch, today you can see quite a leap. They do mention under threads 6-strand DMC. DMC, the French company that many of us use most commonly in our stitching today, goes back into the 18th century. They talk about linen thread, they talk about yarns, carpet thread. I don't see any mention of silk here. And then they mention a whole variety of linens, not using terms like hardanger or Belfast or those which we're more likely to hear of today, but there's an unbleached linen, a French dress linen, a handkerchief linen, or an old bleached linen. And again, I don't know too much about what those terms are, but it's fascinating to kind of see this. This is a snapshot in time. And if you were to research some of those, you would find a rich history there as well. There's a little brief discussion of how to cross stitch, and very much in the manner of quilting, where you put your needle in once and pass it through rather than up and down, up and down, up and down like many of us today do in cross stitch. So the idea was to save time and energy by doing it quickly. And there's even a lovely set of alphabets in the back. I like the alphabets, but I particularly like these monograms where you can include different sets of initials and create monograms for folks. I just, I think it'd be a shame if a book like this didn't exist. And I think it'd be a shame if it were only in a museum somewhere behind a case. I think for those of us who love this and love thinking about the heritage and the legacy of cross stitch, a book like this really is a trip back in time. 1931, that's almost 100 years ago now. And for somebody at that time who was looking for a way to expand just the kind of everyday, sewing buttons on and creating clothes for their family, this gave them some ideas about how to embellish that and how to enjoy the craft just a little bit beyond the necessity of sewing and putting things together. I think it's worthwhile for us to explore vintage opportunities when we find them. I'm told that these days, if you have old books and you try to pass them along to thrift shops and places like that, they won't even take them anymore. They just say dump them. And of course, that's true with a lot of books. I know when I was downsizing more recently and I had a whole library full of books, it was very hard for me to find anything to do with them, and many of them did get recycled because there just was nobody that would take them anymore. And it's true that we can digitize a lot of this stuff. My friend Sharon, who's part of the Weavers Guild, is always sending me these wonderful digitized books from 16th century Germany and things like that with all kinds of wonderful designs. I mean, the ideas are unlimited, but there is something about picking up an actual book and looking at the way it's put together and thinking a little bit about who might have used it, who might have put it together, and why it might have existed at the time, because a printed book would certainly have been something more valuable and less available than it might be today. So I guess that's just a little bit of a message from me today. When you get a chance, take a look at old pieces and old patterns and old designs, and whenever possible, think about integrating those into the modern work that you're doing today. That respects our heritage, and it also gives us a chance to innovate using those ideas and carry them forward. So happy stepping into April tomorrow, and have a great week, and I hope to see you back again soon. This is Gary Sly and the Legacy of Handmade Objects.